Akkadian is a fascinating ancient language as it is one of the earliest languages ever attested and the first attested Semitic language. In fact, Akkadian is so ancient that it is probably the closest documented language to Proto-Semitic, the ancestral language of Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, Amharic, and many other Middle Eastern and African languages. I recommend pausing this and watching our video on Proto-Semitic so you can really see the similarities in vocabulary and grammar between the two, link below in the description. Alright, so let's dig into the history and the emergence of Akkadian. We know that the earliest Semitic speakers in Mesopotamia arrived from the west around 3000 BCE. There they settled with the Sumerians who spoke a language isolate. This as well is described in a separate video, link also in the description. The first evidence that we see of Akkadian is on a list of kings from around 2800 BCE. A few centuries later, the Semitic Akkadians adopted the cuneiform writing system used by the Sumerians to their own language. So around 2500 BCE, we begin to see slowly Akkadian cuneiform entering the archaeological record. Around 2300 BCE, a famous king named Sargon of Akkad conquered the Sumerian city-states and created what is believed to be the first empire in human history. Old Akkadian flourished, although it coexisted with Sumerian, which was used for administrative tablets, the language used by scribes. The Akkadian Empire fell around 2100 BCE and the Sumerian dynasties took over the region. Old Akkadian continued to coexist with Sumerian until around 1900 BCE when the final Sumerian dynasty was overthrown. At this point, Old Akkadian fully displaced Sumerian, and Sumerian became extinct as a spoken language a century later, although it did remain a sacred and literary language for another 2000 years. So around 1900 BCE, we enter the Old Babylonian Empire, and the variety of Akkadian to emerge here is called Old Babylonian Akkadian. If you ever decide to study Akkadian, most textbooks will teach Old Babylonian. From here, you will often hear it being referred to as the Babylonian language, but it's just the Akkadian dialect of the city of Babylon in southern Mesopotamia. One famous emperor we have in this period is Hammurabi in the 18th century BCE, known for issuing the Code of Hammurabi. Written in Old Babylonian Akkadian, this legal text was one of the earliest and most complete written legal codes. Fun fact, the emperors of the Old Babylonian Empire, such as Hammurabi, spoke and promoted Akkadian, although they were ethnically Amorites, the Semites originating in the Levant during this time period, which was the Middle Bronze Age. So over the next few periods, Mesopotamia went under many different empires, although Akkadian persisted and became the lingua franca of the region. As a matter of fact, even foreign rulers that conquered Mesopotamia, such as the Kassites, gave up their own language in favor of Akkadian. One famous body of text during this period was the Amarna correspondences, also known as the Amarna letters, in the 14th century BCE. Written in a dialect of Akkadian that is heavily influenced by Canaanite to the west, it is sometimes called Canaano-Akkadian. Interestingly, these correspondences were between the pharaohs of Egypt and various kingdoms in the Levant. The fact that they were using Akkadian and not Egyptian showed how regionally important Akkadian was during this period. By 1000 BCE, the variety of Akkadian spoken was known as Neo-Babylonian, and it began to lose its lingua franca status to Aramaic. In the 8th century BCE, the rule of the Neo-Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III established Aramaic as the lingua franca. The kings of Babylon and Assyria probably favored Aramaic as it used the brand new 22-letter Phoenician alphabet, which was much simpler than hundreds of cuneiform symbols. The Achaemenid Persians conquered the region in the 6th century BCE and also used Aramaic as a lingua franca. By the time of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE, Akkadian was extinct as a spoken language, although it continued to be written in temples. The last known text in Akkadian cuneiform is an astronomical almanac dated to the 1st century AD. The written language could have persisted in the regions of Syria and Mesopotamia until the 2nd or 3rd century AD. While there is no archaeological evidence of its persistence, the rise of Christianity would have caused the scribal schools and the temples to close, thus leaving it a lost language until its decipherment in the mid-1800s. This concludes the history of Akkadian. Now let's discuss some basic Akkadian grammar. Akkadian follows the SOV word order, subject, object, verb. It is a highly inflected language, meaning that the words change their forms to indicate grammatical functions such as tense, number, or case. And as we've mentioned, Akkadian is a Semitic language of the Eastern Semitic branch. This is different than Hebrew and Aramaic, which are considered Western Semitic languages. It's also worth mentioning that Akkadian is heavily influenced by Sumerian grammar, vocabulary, and writing. And this makes sense as they coexisted for many, many centuries. Alright, Akkadian pronouns. Let's go ahead and look over them. Anaku, Ata, Ati, Shu, Shi, Ninu, Atunu, Atina, Shunu, Shina. Alright, let's take a look at some Akkadian nouns. So you will notice that many of the words have a dash before the final two letters. The last two letters are the case endings, which we will discuss more in the next slide, with the main root being the word before the dash. So let's go ahead and take a look at some words. Awilum, Matum, Bitum, Ashatum, Ilum, Iltum, and notice that feminine nouns have the T infix. sharum. Sharatum. Again, notice the T infix. Marum. And you could tell that daughter would just be martum. Kaspum. Alpum. Imerum. Okay, and these were the case endings that I was talking about in the previous slide. So all the nouns that you saw were in the singular nominative form, which is the ending. Now, if it was a possessive noun, it would use the genitive, im, or e for plural. If it was accusative, meaning that it's the object of a sentence, it would be or again e, similar to the genitive if it's plural. Now, Akkadian verbs can get pretty complicated because they can be determined by different stems, tenses, conjugations. So to make things simple, we will just go over the present form in the G stem, which is the basic conjugation. So let's go ahead and take a look at the conjugation for the verb parasum, meaning to decide. Aprus, taprus, taprusi, iprus, niprus, taprusi, taprusa, iprusu, iprusa. And I'm not going to go more into depth on the verbs because it can get very, very complicated, although this is just a basic overview of how verb conjugation works in Akkadian. Let's take a look at Akkadian particles and prepositions. Ana, ana iltim. Ishtu, ishtu alim. Inna, inna shari. Iti, iti belim. U, ata u anaku. Lu, albam, lu, imaram. And notice that nouns following prepositions are always written in the genitive case, hence the im ending. Let's take a look at a sample text. So this is section 7 of the Hammurabi law code, which was written in the mid-18th century BC. This is written in the Old Babylonian dialect of Akkadian. Let's look over it. Shumma awilum, lu kaspam, lu charutsam, lu wardam, lu amtam, lu alpam, lu imeram, lu imeram, ulu mimma shumshu inna, qat mar awilim, ulu warad awilim balum shibi, uriksatim ishtam, ulu ana matzarutim imkhur, awilum shu sharraq idak. This concludes the sample text and the video. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to Linguaberry for more content like this. Until next time.